Caretaker by Omar Cuellar. It was the year 1985. In the small, snow-covered town of Woodstock, Vermont, lived Georgie, an 11-year-old boy whose main concerns were staying entertained through the winter and, if possible, earning a little extra money. That was when he met Alfred, an eccentric octogenarian millionaire who resided in a majestic Georgian mansion on the outskirts of town. Alfred was planning to visit his granddaughter in Florida for a week, and with a mysterious air, offered Georgie an unusual job, caring for some special creatures that lived in the mansion. There was, however, one strange condition. According to Alfred, these creatures were entirely imaginary and could only exist if Georgie imagined them. Georgie was a pragmatic boy who didn't believe in fairy tales or ghost stories. To him, Alfred was just a lonely, eccentric old man with odd ideas. He wasn't worried about monsters or cosmic beings, only about the money he would earn. So he accepted the offer without much thought. How hard could it be to care for creatures that didn't exist? On his first night at the mansion, snow fell heavily and the wind howled through the bare trees. The house, with its antique lamps and dusty rugs, had a solemn atmosphere, but nothing out of the ordinary. Georgie spent the night watching television, watering a few plants, and exploring the corners of the house. The second day passed in much the same way. The snow continued to fall, and the enormous mansion felt even more isolated. Georgie began to grow bored. There were no signs of the creatures Alfred had mentioned. Did the old man really expect him to pretend to imagine monsters? It was ridiculous. He snorted in annoyance as he shoveled snow from the porch and prepared for another monotonous night. But on the third day, the boredom became unbearable. He had watched every program on television, explored every room in the house, and even leafed through the old books in the library. With a sigh, he let his mind wander. If there really were creatures here, what would they look like? He thought. That was when he imagined it. A small, furry black creature with enormous glowing eyes and long claws, but not menacing ones. It wasn't frightening. It was curious and mischievous. Georgie pictured it scampering across the rug, climbing the curtains, and hiding behind the furniture. He smiled, amused. The idea was more entertaining than anything else in the house. The next day, he added more details. Now, there were several of these little monsters roaming the mansion, some with pointed ears, others with long, bushy tails. By the fifth night, the mansion was completely filled with them. Far from being scared, Georgie felt fascinated. He now had a purpose. He fed the creatures, made small nests for them out of pillows and blankets, and kept them entertained. He soon discovered that they loved horror stories. So, holding a flashlight under his chin, he told them spooky tales in the darkness of the grand living room. But his most surprising discovery was that the creatures also enjoyed classical music and ballet. In a burst of inspiration, Georgie began dancing for them, spinning and leaping while the little monsters watched, clumsily imitating his movements. The days flew by in a whirlwind of activity. Georgie was no longer bored. He was always busy caring for these mysterious creatures. He had also grown fond of them, and they seemed to depend on his imagination for their existence. The house no longer felt lonely. It had become a refuge brimming with life and fantasy. But all good things must come to an end. The week drew to a close, and on a morning with clear skies, Alfred returned to his mansion. Georgie felt a lump in his throat at the thought of saying goodbye to his new friends. When Alfred stepped through the door, his eyes carefully scanned the mansion. The old man smiled with satisfaction. where there had once been only empty air and silence. Dozens of furry creatures now scurried about, climbing furniture, playing, and watching him with curiosity. Alfred looked at Georgie and nodded approvingly. "Congratulations," he said warmly. "I see you managed to imagine the Gospodarka species. They are a very rare cosmic race, and few people can bring them into existence." Georgie blinked in surprise. For the first time, he wondered whether Alfred had truly been crazy, or whether instead he knew something Georgie didn't fully understand. The old man continued, "I hired you for 2 reasons. The first was that I knew you would get bored in this huge house, but the second, and more important, was that I wanted you to train your imagination, and you have done it wonderfully." Georgie looked around. The creatures gazed at him with their large, shining eyes. Alfred was right. What had started as a game had become something much greater. He smiled, though with a touch of sadness. He knew that when he left, the Gospodarka would vanish with him. But he also knew that, in his mind, they would always exist, and perhaps one day he would imagine them again. Georgie stood in silence for a moment, watching Alfred. The old man did not seem surprised or frightened by the Gospodarka swarming through the mansion. On the contrary, his expression was one of pride and satisfaction. Georgie didn't know what to say. Throughout the week, he had thought it was all just a product of his imagination. But now, seeing Alfred's reaction, he began to wonder if there was more to it. What if these creatures weren't merely figments of his mind? What if they had always been there, waiting for someone to give them form? "Does this mean they're real?" Georgie asked, a hint of doubt in his voice. Alfred let out a soft chuckle and approached one of the creatures, which purred at his presence. "As real as anything you can imagine," he replied. "What most people fail to understand is that imagination is not just a children's game. It is a powerful tool, a doorway to other worlds. Most adults forget how to use it, but children still hold the key. You, Georgie, have shown that your mind is stronger than you think." The boy looked around. The little beings gazed at him adoringly, as if he were their creator and protector. In a way, he was. Georgie felt a mixture of pride and sadness. He knew that now that Alfred was back, his time at the mansion was over. With a sigh, he approached the creatures and petted them one last time. "I guess this is goodbye," he murmured. But Alfred shook his head. "Not necessarily," he said. "The Gospodarka will continue to exist as long as you remember them. You may not always see them, but they will be with you. And who knows, perhaps one day you will meet someone else who needs to learn how to imagine. When that happens, you'll know what to do." Georgie smiled. He didn't fully understand what Alfred meant, but something inside him told him the old man was right. With one last glance at the mansion and the creatures he had brought to life, he put on his coat and stepped out into the cold. The snow was still falling gently, covering the ground with a white blanket. But this time, the world felt a little more magical.